Assalamu alaikum, everyone. MashaAllah. Hope you guys had a refreshing brief break. But to ensure that we don't fall asleep at all or feel in any way weary in the next session, we're going to stand up together, take a few deep breaths, and actually just rejuvenate a little bit, inshallah. All right? So, bismillah. What we'll do, everyone take some deep breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth, in through the nose, out through the mouth, ensuring that the exhalation is longer than the inhalation. So forgive us, we've had some, alhamdulillah, some shifts here and there with the schedule. Thankfully, we're only a few minutes behind schedule. But at this point, inshallah, we would like to get right into session 6, titled Justice or AdI in transactions with Sheikh Yahya Rhodus, inshallah. After this session, we will have a break for Salat al-Asr, and then we'll have some instructions for you all regarding the interactive sessions, which is when we can get deeper into questions. So inshallah, we'll have this session until 5:45. And we can hold any questions till the end, ideally till the interactive session. and then we'll give you some more instructions about how to rotate that. So with that, without further ado, hope you're all feeling refreshed, a little bit of levity for the evening or the afternoon, and Bismillah, we'll begin.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة وأتم تسليم على سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, we should be very thankful for what it is that we've heard thus far, these blessed sessions on the Islamic gift economy. May Allah Ta'ala expand the horizons of our mind and to bless us to understand truth as truth really is, and to be able to put it into practice in a way that is pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I'm hoping that everybody follows up on what it is that they've heard, hopefully that their interest has been sparked, and an intention will follow to put this knowledge into practice to the extent possible. And it's a grand vision that is very, very important, but there are ways for us to bring it into our own lives on an individual basis, step by step, little by little. And inshallah ta'ala, we hope to touch on a little bit of that in the interactive session as well as in the closing session. And we will also be sending out some that further reading for you, especially in relation to the Islamic gift economy. But in addition to that, I would highly, highly recommend that everybody try to acquire, whenever way possible, even if you have to get it shipped from Malaysia, the translation of the book of the proprieties of earning and living. And really, any translation that comes out on any of the books of the Yahya, as long as it's a trustworthy translation, it's very good to have that on the shelf and to read it. So we're going to continue our discussion of the Yahya, and now we're going to pivot back into a direct study, which is now of chapter 3. So remember we said that Book 13 contains 5 chapters. The introduction is in chapter 1 is what was covered last night. And the idea there was to kind of set the tone for the weekend and to discuss in an overarching way everything that it is that we are going to discuss. And in particular in session 2, Ustad Amjad touched upon the merit of earning a living, highlighting a few verses from the Quran and several prophetic sayings, as well as athar, statements of the righteous predecessors. And then Ustad Yusuf, may Allah bless him, this morning dealt with some of the outward dimension fiqh related to transactions. And of course, that in and of itself is a large topic. And whenever we think about this, anything really, in relation to our deen, but especially when it comes to earning a livelihood, we want to at very least be at that level of permissibility. And as he's speaking, people might be thinking, if I'm in this line of work, what do I do? And he very nicely laid out for us, if someone is in a line of work that is impermissible, is that you want to, over a period of time, without causing yourself undue duress or hardship, move to something that's better. And that a lesser degree is to that be involved in a type of work is of doubtful nature. But a better degree is to have a type of work that is permissible. But the best, which is really where we ideally as individuals and families and communities should be striving, is that we do a line of work that is praiseworthy, commendable, legally recommended. And much of this we will touch upon tomorrow. And it's been mentioned more than once, this idea of having a line of work that fulfills a fard kifaya, a communal obligation, and we'll be coming back to this tomorrow because this is one of the ways that we can move towards a higher degree of ihsan, is to not only make that intention, but to select our career based upon that, and in a very real way make the intention to provide that service and have that be what motivates you and propels you to do the work. And you'd be surprised how many professions are a part of the Fard Kifaya in the broadest sense, and we'll be touching upon what Imam Al-Ghazali mentions in book 1 of the Yahya, because he deals with his conception of the Fard Kifaya, which of course he was a great usuli and scholar of Islamic legal theory, and he has a very vast and very beneficial definition that is very inclusive of the Fard Kifaya. And it's just really interesting to note that that word kifaya, it does have the connotation of sufficing the community in the sense of bearing that responsibility so that no sin falls upon others who would have sin fall upon them were no one to do it, but also the meaning of sufficiency, fard kifaya, being self-sufficient. As hard as that is, and as grand as a topic that is that this is one of the objectives, clearly, of the concept of fard kifaya and what our deen ultimately points us towards. And you have these amazing examples in Islamic history of that societies that were virtually that self-sufficient. And the one that I know best is the place that I studied in Tarim. They said that traditionally there was only 3 things they imported. And it was coffee, which it's not possible to grow that in the desert of Hadramaut, and razors and needles. Everything else that they had it provided for locally. And anyhow, that we'll come back to that bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So that after having an overview of the Islamic gift economy, now we're going to touch upon chapter 3. And Imam Al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu titles this chapter في بيان العدل واجتناب الظلم في المعاملة. And this translates on the elucidation or clarification of adl, of justice, and avoiding oppression, dhulm, or unjustness in mu'amala, in transaction. So mu'amala is a word that we've been hearing, and it is a very important word. And really what it is getting at is there's some type of dealing between you and another person. This form always, the fa'ala form, has the meaning of you doing the act of the trilateral root with another person. And mu'amala is right at the heart of our deen. Our Prophet said, ad-deen al-mu'amala. Just as he says, ad-deen al-nasiha. And normally the khabar, the predicate, will not have the alif lam ta'rif. And it will be that indefinite. In this case, it is definite, and that rhetorically means that all of the deen is mu'amala ultimately. It's all about dealings. And we only truly come to know people by their mu'amala, which we also heard a reference to. So he's moving up, as you can see here, in his presentation of this material, is that after giving us the basic ahkam of what we need to know of the most important transactions, and Sheikh Yusuf essentially that summarized that in his session. And again, there's more that we need to know there. Then after this is that we also need to know things that we need to avoid when we're transacting. Now, it's a difficult task to understand all of the difficult types of transactions of our time and to, in a very succinct way, summarize them. So what we're going to do is we're just going to touch upon the material to the extent possible. And Ustad Amjad's going to laugh at me that I have that 23 pages of material that we're going to try to cover in less than an hour. So we'll do the best that we can and to get as much as this out. May Allah Ta'ala place barakah in our time. I hope everyone's not too tired. If we need to, at the midway point, to rejuvenate ourselves with some more stretching and some more jogging in place, that please just let me know. But this is important, and one of the things Imam Al-Ghazali does, and this is where he's so masterful, is that he'll touch upon these because he was also, in addition to being a master usuli, a master fiqh, and made some of the greatest contributions to the Shafi school of all. He mastered the science of law, and he then intertwines what is known, as we spoke about, the ilm tariq al-akhir, and shows how this approach is a part of how it is you and I should be viewing everything that it is that we do, but especially all of our dealings and all of our transactions. So there's a lot of tasawwuf in this section, even though he's talking about adl, which you normally would only associate with rights or outward rulings of the sacred law. So he begins by saying, and I think for time's sake we're just going to read the English, know that a transaction sometimes comes in a form with respect to which the jurisconsult, yani the mufti, the one who issues legal opinion, rules the transaction to be valid and contracted, but the transaction nevertheless implicates some manner of oppression, i.e., it is unjust, by which the transactor is exposed to the wrath of Allah Most High. And so we know there are certain things that you can get away with in a legal sense, i.e. the qadi cannot take you to account if you would live in a Muslim country and you couldn't be taken to court for it. So it would be outwardly that on the last day before you have to pay your zakat, you give all of your wealth to your wife. And now she has all of your wealth. You don't have to pay her zakat. And the next day she could give it back to you. And you don't have to pay zakat on that money. But you're playing games with who? Right? Outwardly, the qadi cannot force you to pay zakat. But inwardly, you've done something that is an abomination. And that you can't play games like that with Allah Ta'ala. And there are certainly some permissible hilas, that legal stratagem, that is important for us to learn so that when it becomes difficult, and this is one of the amazing characteristics about the sacred law, is that it becomes more elastic and it expands the more difficult the circumstances are. And so on one hand, that we need that legal dimension so we don't unnecessarily make things difficult for people while we inspire them to be people that move towards ihsan. Ihsan is degrees. And so this should be our approach. And he says, this oppression, this dhulm, refers to that which others are harmed by, and it is divided into those that harm, that whose harm is of a pervasive nature, i.e., harmful to the transactors and third parties. It's widespread. And that which is particular to the transactor. So these are the two that types of harm. Now, what we're going to see is, and this is where Ustad Amjad is going to pick up tomorrow morning, is that Imam Al-Ghazali says is that at least we have to be just. And if we're just, there's salvation in justice. But then there's degrees after that. And so what he's touching upon here is how we need to be careful, because even in relation to the way that we transact, there's ways that we can harm, and this ultimately goes against the whole purpose of what it is that we should be doing in relation to our interactions with other people, which should be based upon our goodwill towards them and wanting for them what we want for our own selves. And so this is really right at the heart of what he is bringing out. So there is a type of harm that is widespread, and then there is a type of harm that specifically relates to the one or the ones transacting. And again, you will start to see that some undertones and some of the major problems in our time when it comes to certain things like this, and the problems of the food industry and problems of food waste, and you will start to see some become aware of very evil practices in the modern world that relate to control of food. And this is what many people are saying, is that many of the wars of this century are going to be over resources. And this is why we need these practices and this understanding. So he then is going to talk about al-qism al-awwal. This is the first type. And this is the type of harm that is widespread. And he mentions two things. The first is what he calls ihtikar. And Ustad Yusuf had briefly mentioned some of this in his session, but we're going to go deeper. Ihtikar here is also the word for monopoly in Arabic, but here it means hoarding. And so what does it mean? Is that the seller of staple foodstuffs, the type of food that people need that keep their back straight, wheat, rice, things of this nature, that this person stores up staple foodstuffs in anticipation of their prices going up, appreciating. This is an act of general oppression, and its perpetrator is censored in revealed law. He's going to explain it further. But the idea, when people are in need of staple food, intentionally waiting when it could be sold for the price to go up. This is amazing. And our Prophet ﷺ said, "Man ihtakara at-ta'am 40 yawman." Whoever hoards food for 40 days, ثُمَّ تَصَدَّقَ بِهِ, and then gives it away in charity, and he doesn't even sell it, لَمْ تَكُنْ صَدَقَةُ كَفَّارَةً لِإِحْتِكَارَ. His charity will not be an expiation for his sin of hoarding. And then in another narration, وروى ابن عمر عنه صلى الله عليه وسلم, this is narrated by Imam Ahmad, من احتكر الطعام 40 يوما فقد برئ من الله وبرئ الله منه. Whoever hoards food for 40 days has indeed disavowed Allah, and Allah has disavowed him. And so this is something that is very, very serious. And then Imam Al-Ghazali mentions this beautiful story. And these are windows into how people were. Now, maybe there's a lot of people in their time that weren't like that. But this is the purpose of stories, is that they inspire us to be the best of ourselves. We don't want just to read about normal people. We want to read about people that are better than us, that can inspire us to be better. And whenever we read stories of the righteous, even if we can't do exactly what it is that they did, at very least we love them and benefit through that. But secondly, we try to at least do something of what they've done. So it is reported of a pious predecessor that he was in Wasit, where he loaded a boat full of wheat for Basra. And he wrote to his agent, the one who's going to sell it for him, "Sell this food on the day you arrive in Basra, and do not postpone it until the next day." The agent encountered in Basra low prices for wheat. And the merchants there said to him, "If you postpone selling until Friday, you will profit many times over." So he postponed it until Friday and profited in its sale many times over. He then wrote to the wheat owner informing him of that, and he wrote back to him, "Oh, how unfortunate is this? We would have been content with a little profit along with the security of our religion, while you have contravened this arrangement." Okay, everyone following here? He's not mad at him he's mad at him that he didn't sell it earlier and receive less profit. Most people, right, would be the opposite. "We do not desire," he says, "to multiply profits by its sale through sacrificing anything of the religion. You have surely committed a crime against us. When this letter of mine reaches you, take all of the money and give it away in charity to the poor of Basra. Word that I have been delivered from the crime of hoarding altogether, regardless of whether it was committed against me or for me." Now, let's not just go home and quit our jobs, or just, we don't necessarily have to be that job. This was his hal, that was his state. But these are windows. And I guarantee you, anything you leave for Allah, wallahi, Allah will provide you with something better. It might require a little bit of patience and a little bit of zuhud, detachment, but Allah will provide you with something better 100%. And if you live by that principle, you will always come out on top, guaranteed. Not by my guarantee. This is what Allah has guaranteed for His servant. Anything you leave for Allah, Allah will provide you with something better. So then he goes into more detail about why this is a prohibition. This is really where he's trying to get at by mentioning ihtikar, hoarding, as an example. He says, and know that the prohibition of hoarding is absolute, but it's mutlaq. Some considerations pertain to it in regard to the occasion of hoarding and the kind of food hoarded. As for the kind of food, the prohibition of hoarding applies to the various kinds of staple foodstuffs. Why? Because this is what people need to survive. But as for what is not staple food, nor substantively complementary to staple food, like medicinal remedies, spices, saffron, and others like them, that has the same legal ruling as staple food. Then the prohibition does not apply to them, even if they are eaten together with food. So things that you could do without, that you don't absolutely need. Various types of fine foods, or various types of toppings and sauces and things of this nature. But then he says, as for what complements staple foods like meat and fruits, and what substitutes the need for staple foods on some occasions, even though it is not possible for it to be eaten on a regular basis, then this is subject to scrutiny with regard to the prohibition of hoarding them or not. So he's a faqih. He's saying when it comes to staple food and that which is substantively like them, definitely. But then there's this other gray area where you don't need meat to survive. You don't need fruit to survive. You can eat simple food and still survive. He's saying this is an issue that needs legal scrutiny. And you might find various differences of opinion amongst the great scholars in different schools on this particular matter. There are from among the scholars who extend the prohibition of hoarding to cooking butter, honey, sesame oil, cheese, olive oil, and other foods like these. And of course, he's just mentioning examples. So this is really profound. Look at how ethical this is. And I don't think, and really one of the benefits of reading this is that you just start to realize the very tip of the iceberg of our tradition. And what I mean by our tradition is the deen in its entirety and all of the different ways that it manifests at the theological, legal, and spiritual level. It is deeper than anything deep and more profound than anything profound. Everything that we need is there. And that doesn't mean that it's easy to solve the problems of our time, but our greatest problem is our ignorance of what it is that we have. And how amazed, like this is what we should spend our time learning and studying. This is what we should immerse ourselves in. And it doesn't mean that we don't study other types of knowledge. But how many people are studying loads of other types of knowledge and they're ignorant of even the basics of our deen? And you'd be surprised when you go beyond the surface level what's there and how profound it is. It's really profound. But this is what we need. We need a whole generation of thousands and thousands of Muslims in the Western and non-Western world to engage our tradition at the highest level and learn from qualified scholarship and not just take shallow dives, but take deep dives. And then to make your own contributions. Anyone knows that it's very difficult to write an article if you haven't read a lot. If you're going to write, you have to read. And you have to be freed up and be distraction-free for an extended period of time. But you have to read. And that once you read and you read and you read, and this is why they have comprehensive exams in the PhD process in the United States of America. I was going to say something, never mind. But you have to know what's been written on the topic before you even start to engage in any unique contribution to it. And then you have to read other things and then make a synthesis in your own mind and produce a new thesis, a new way of looking at something, a new contribution to that particular field. It's a process. And it's no different. But if we ignore our tradition, and we are afflicted, as some of our shuyukh have said, we're almost like we're ummi. It's almost like we're unlettered and illiterate. We're so ignorant of our tradition and what exists in the literature that we have. So he then goes on to say, as for the occasion, so he spoke about the type of food. Now he's going to talk about the time or the occasion. The prohibition of hoarding also bears application to all occasions. And this is evidenced by the story I've mentioned regarding the food that encountered low prices in Basra. However, it can also bear application specifically to occasions when food is in short supply, while people are in need of it, such that postponing its sale will bring about some hardship. So again, do you see how the common good is so much a part of this? It's right at the heart of this system. But as for food, when it is widely available and abundant, while people are not in need of it and they do not incline to it except when the food is offered at lower prices, in this situation the food dealer awaits that but awaits not scarcity. Then there is no harm in withholding the sale of the food. So everything has a proper place where it needs to be placed. But then he says, but if the time in question is the time of drought, then there will be harm in storing up honey, ghee, sesame oil, and other foods like these, where he says it's questionable about its prohibition, and so it should be judged to be prohibited as hoarding. So if things are difficult, we should go out of our way to alleviate that harm. And then he mentions something very interesting here. And on the whole, and this is the Shafi'i opinion, trading in foodstuffs is something disliked, what are known as aqwat. Because trading is seeking profits, whereas foodstuffs are created for subsistence. And profits are part of acquiring privileges, i.e., that they're not for the sake of survival, but for the sake of luxury and embellishment in good life. Hence, one should seek profit in those things which are created from the totality of the privileges from which people do not have pressing need. That doesn't mean that it's haram to sell, but someone has to be very careful. Because when you're dealing with something that people need, is that you need to be very careful not to withhold those needs from people because of your own greed. So this is what he says about foodstuffs. And again, if you really think about the application of this in our time and all of the things that we hear about literally that some food being destroyed while there's people starving because you want the market price for that food stuff to go up, and the games in the international economy, and how that so many Muslim countries have been tricked through very sophisticated and conniving and devilish economic warfare into accepting loans and getting in debt. And then because of oftentimes the corrupt puppet governments, very little, first of all, there's oftentimes falsified economic graphs where they think that there's going to be a certain amount of growth when it doesn't actually really happen. And then most of that money doesn't actually get back to the people. It's usurped by the corrupt elite. And then you have a recipe for disaster. And you that have been wiping out indigenous environments and livelihoods because you wanted to build this electric grid here, and that whole economy and the subsistence was based upon fishing in that lake or whatever. And this is the story that keeps repeating itself over and over again, over and over again. It's been going on for the past 50 to 70 years, and really for the past several hundred years in the whole colonial enterprise. And we're still dealing with the repercussions of this today. So we can't bypass this as if that it's gone. It's important for us to be aware of this. And we study this knowledge first and foremost to protect our own selves. Don't take part in it at very least. We don't necessarily have all of the answers to solve it overnight. That's not going to happen. We can take small steps in the right direction, but at very least, know what's out there and save yourself first and foremost. And hate evil, hate oppression. and don't be someone who takes part in that. And make the right decision. And it's much better to make less money and to get by than it is to take the risk of making profit when you might be taken into account for how it is that you earn that money. So the second thing that he says here that is of general harm, widespread, pervasive harm, is counterfeit money. And you'll see how he that ties this into this idea of that tabi'at and that sins that are between us and other people, and then that initiating in a bad sunnah. We usually speak about that hadith in the good sense, but there's another side to it. And so he says the second type is putting counterfeit dirhams into circulation together with the bona fide money, since the transactor will be harmed by them if he is unaware. And even if he is aware, he will in turn circulate them to others, and likewise the third and fourth transactors in their turn. This counterfeit money will not cease to be passed around in the hands of people, and thus the harm becomes pervasive and the corruption widespread. The crime of all of them and its evil consequences will recoil on him, for he is the one who opened the door to harm and corruption in the first place. If he was aware. If someone was unaware, they're not taken into account. But if they're aware, counterfeit money. And then we have a hadith that we all know in Sahih Muslim. And the first part of it was about a sunnah hasana, a good practice. But the second part is whoever initiates a bad practice, and anyone who acts upon what it is that that person did after him, the sin, he will bear that person's sin and the sin of all of those who act upon it after him without diminishing their sins in any way. So this is serious. This is serious. And this is something that we want to be aware of. And so he says, therefore, the crime of that evil custom will be borne by him after his death for 100 years or for 200 years or more until those coins are destroyed. He's using this as an example, but then apply it to other things in our life. He will also be held accountable for whatever is corrupted and diminished of people's wealth due to his evil precedent. And then he says this very important religious principle. Tuba liman idha mata matat ma'u dhunubuh. That glad tidings to the one that if he dies, that his sins die with him. That what we want is sadaqah jariyah, yani knowledge that is benefited from pious children who pray for us, that we want to leave an ongoing charity. But we need to be careful of the other side of it. And even people that are trying to do good, it is important. What have we initiated a bad practice? And unfortunately, we oftentimes do this with our own children, where much of what they end up doing, if we're honest with ourselves, who taught them that? And may Allah protect us and preserve us and forgive us all. Ultimately, we're all in need of our Lord's mercy, subhanahu wa ta'ala. But this is really, really something to think about. And then he quotes the verse, وَنَكْتُبُ مَا قَدَّمُوا وَآثَارَهُمْ. And we write what they send forth and what they leave behind. Right? This relates to their good deeds, but also this relates to their bad deeds. And when Allah Ta'ala says, يُنَبُّ الْإِنسَانُ يَوْمِئِذٍ بِمَا قَدَّمَ وَأَخَّرَ, all then will be informed of what they have sent forth and left behind. And this also relates to these sunan sayyah, these bad practices that we left behind that then other people are following. And so he says here that he goes into a lot more detail about the 5 issues of counterfeit money, which we're not going to go into. But then he says something important. وَسُلُوكُ طَرِيقَ الْحَقِّ بِمِثَالِ هَذَا فِي التِّجَارَةِ أَشَّدُّ مِنَ الْمُوَاظَبَةِ عَلَى النَّوَافِلِ الْعِبَادَاتِ وَالتَّخَلِّي لَهَا. Treading the path of the truth on this ethical pattern in commerce is more difficult than assiduousness in the observance of the supererogatory devotional acts. In other words, that this is something we really need to think about. And he's speaking 950 years ago, roughly. So what about now in our time? And on one hand, again, we don't want to make things exceedingly difficult on people. No, that especially people have already fallen into something. what we've always learned from our teachers is that if someone's fallen into something already, you look for opinions to تحمل أعمالهم عليه, that they'll be carried by that opinion until that they can find something better. And at the same time, if someone comes to you and they've yet to do something, you try to guide them to the best and most scrupulous option possible for that person, depending upon where they are in relation to their deen. And so we cannot just be, this is what one of the other ulama has said, is that ad-deen akhdhu rukhsatan and thiqah. Deen is taking a dispensation from a qualified source. وَأَمَّا التَّشْدِيدُ فَيُحْسِنُ كُلُّ النَّاسِ. Everybody can be harsh and difficult and that overly conservative. That's easy. It's narrow. This is the way. خلاص. لا. Deen أخذ رخصة and ثقة. We don't do ta'meem of the rukhas, where we just open up the door for everybody to take dispensations and everybody just take it easy. Nor do we open the door for tatabbu al-rukhas. That's by scholarly consensus, something that's blameworthy, where you just take the easiest opinion in everything. But you know who's before you. You know where they're at in their deen, what they're capable of doing. You know very well the situations surrounding them, and then you guide them to what's best for them. Now, that requires training. And you can see how that just basic levels of training and only being in the books is not going to suffice, especially when we talk about a highly complicated situation like the one which we have, where just look at the diversity in this room, let alone if we consider the diversity of the Muslim community in our time, and that so many different factors that have to be taken into consideration, but someone can be trained. And when you've been around your teachers that have this very broad perspective, you see they're like chameleons. And they're not changing the deen, but they're giving everybody exactly what it is that they need. Like our Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is why we have so much difference of opinion in the first place. Is because the Prophet knew what to give everybody. And this is a part of the mercy of the sacred law. Is that multiple people can be following different positions simultaneously, all of which is in a continuum between takhfif to tashdid, leniency to more conservatism, and they're all still following the sacred law. And that's amazing. And then the next category is the second division of that whose harm bears particularly on the mu'amal, the one dealing, the one transacting. And here he says, فَكُلُّ مَا يَسْتَضِرُّ بِهِ الْمُعَامَلِ فَهُوَ الظُّلْمُ وَإِنَّمَا الْعَدْلَ لَا يَضُرُّ بِأَخِيهِ الْمُسْلِمِ. Anything by which the transaction is harmed is oppression. Justice is that a Muslim is not harmed by his brother. Justice is that a Muslim is not harmed by his brother. That's where we begin. And sometimes we talk about lofty ideals of community, which is good. But let's talk about the huquq of a Muslim. That's coming in one of the upcoming books. Inshallah, we don't get to that. Maybe, I think in the next year. Maybe the last retreat of this year. Because he includes that in his discussion of suhbah. Let's talk about the huquq of a Muslim. Basic rights that oftentimes we're not giving our believers, our fellow believers. And that's oppression. That's dhulm. Now, this is one of the most important parts of the whole book. And this is why that Dr. AdI said is that the core thesis of the Yahya is as it was. Now, this is where Imam Ghazali says it. وَالضَّابِطْ الْكُلِّيُّ. The general precept here is what? أَلَّا يُحِبَّ لِأَخِي إِلَّا مَا يُحِبْ لِنَفْسِهِ. Is that one desires not for his brother except what he desires for himself. One should not engage other people in any transaction that would cause hardship to him or burden his heart were he himself to be engaged in it. Rather, one should view as equally valuable one's own dirham, yani or dollar, and the dirham or dollar of one's brother. That is right at the heart of this whole matter of this entire book, of the Islamic gift economy in its modern articulation. This is right at the heart of how it is that you and I need to see these matters. And on one hand, you have Muslims that expect to be hooked up. They like almost think like it's a crime if you pay for a service, which is ridiculous. No, if you contract someone's service, you shouldn't expect them to hook you up, or you shouldn't expect them to give you a discount. You should expect them to give you a fair market price. Now, if from their end they give you a discount, that's on them. But you can't expect them to give you ihsan. You can expect them to give you fair market value. And that's not right, unless it's like your close brother. That's different. But there is absolutely nothing wrong with making profit. Now, the one caveat there, and this is actually coming, is that not on religion. Don't profit on religion. And if it would be possible for us not to charge for any of these programs, we would surely do it. We don't like charging for programs. We don't even like charging tuition for students. If you want to make money, just don't make money through religion. Don't make money through religion. Make money in something else. And be very careful if when you charge that your mentality is that I want to generate income to do more projects, because then there's other side effects that you don't know that are happening with that approach. Now, it's a type of najasa that's ma'fu anha, because some types of legal filth are excused, to charge for needs. And if you look at the costs of putting a program on like this, is that we try not to charge more than that, to just yalla get by. And having said all of that, anyone who is unable to that afford the cost of the retreat is still welcome. We try not to ever turn anyone away. And I think our standards are low compared to the standards of our teachers. Our standards actually here are low, are significantly lower than the standards of our teachers. And our teachers are such that when they put on a program, is that there was a little bit of money left over one year. And so they asked our teachers what to do with it. And he says, divide it amongst all the people there and return it to them. In other words, like, no way, don't take anything extra. Anything in surplus, divide it amongst them and return it. This is the way that we should really be when it comes to deen. So this is the general prayer. You should desire for your brother what you desire for your own self. His dirham should be like your dirham. And again, there's nothing wrong with making a reasonable profit on something. If you took the time to go to a different place, bring back merchandise, you have the right to sell it for a higher price, if we use that example. If you're providing a service for someone, you have a right to charge a market fair going price for that. But this is, we don't want to exceed the bounds here. No. And then some of them said, whoever sells something to his brother for a dirham, which he himself would not have deemed proper to buy unless it was for 5 dawaniq. A danik is 1/6 of a dirham. Then he has indeed abandoned giving the good counsel that is enjoined in transaction. So let alone trying to cheat people or trying to that exploit people. Think about the amount of exploitation. La ilaha illallah. And how it's really difficult. La ilaha illallah. And some of this for people that are in the cutthroat world of business, if you own your own business, or some that are in the cutthroat world of corporate America, might think that some of this is impractical. And I hope that we can have some of those discussions in the interactive session. And what I would say is that don't jump to the conclusion that it's all impractical. There definitely is things that we can put into practice. And you'd be surprised that if you stick to your principles, even if in the short term there's a little bit of discomfort, in the long term you'll always win, 100%. And as your life progresses, is that Allah will make the reality that happens around you based upon the principles that it is that you adhere to, not the opposite. And know that, because Allah Ta'ala that will change the condition around you if you that adhere to His religion and devote yourself to Him. So he's going to mention here 4 things that are of particular harm to the transactor. The first is that one should not praise the merchandise for what is not in it, that one should not conceal any of its defects, that one should not conceal anything of its true weight or measure, that one should not conceal anything of its price, such that if the buyer were to know about it, he would not have wanted it. Now he's speaking specifically in a very traditional understanding of commerce, buying and selling. And this doesn't apply directly to many of the other types of transactions, some of which we've heard about today. But this is just a window into some of the principles that we want to consider. And then by analogy, we can think about how they apply to various other things that we are doing. So the first is that not praising or overly praising the merchandise. If he praises it for something that is not found in it, then it is lying. So anyone who's into sales, you got to be careful. If the buyer accepts his commendation, then that is obfuscation and oppression along with it being lying. If he does not accept what he praises about the merchant, then it is lying as well as a loss of reputation, and part of his loss is muru'ah. Since lying per se in promoting some form of merchandise that may sometimes not apparently impair one's reputation. If he praises the merchandise for what is in it of good qualities, then that is senseless jabber and indulging in talk that does not concern him. His standard is very high. And he will be held to account for every word that proceeds from him as to why he said it. So if you sell a used car, okay, you have to just be honest. And it's much better just be like, this is the used car. If it's been in an accident, even if there wasn't a claim and you fixed it so that it's not even on record, it's haram for you to not disclose that there's been an accident. And that money that you get from that vehicle is haram. It's serious. If you have a car, explain, this car's been in an accident and I fixed it. And if you know there's problems with it, you can explain it. You have to explain it. This is what's wrong with it. This is the history of it. Any questions they have, you explain them to them. It's very simple. If they want to buy it, they buy it. If not, they don't buy it. Allah will provide you with someone else. And so many people embellish things when it comes to this. And so this is something we really want to consider. And these, again, are just examples. Naam. And then he says is that we should never ever swear an oath all about marriage. Unfortunately, this is so common in the Muslim world. La ilaha illallah. People are swearing an oath over a small little worldly thing that you're trying to sell. It's ridiculous. You swear an oath by Allah Jalla Jalaluhu to sell some small piece of the worthless dunya. That's not something we should be doing. So he says the second thing is that the seller has to expose all of the defects in the merchandise, whether minor or major. If he conceals a defect, then he is an oppressor and fraudster. And fraud is forbidden. This is ghish. And an evader of giving good counsel in transaction. And so he says, and whenever the merchant reveals the better of the two sides of a garment, but conceals the other side. So if you're selling a house and you know you have mold, but you just like paint over the wall or something, don't tell them there's mold, right? Or all of these types of things, you have to be honest with these things. When you sell a house, when you sell a car. So even though we might not be merchants, all of us are going to sell things at times. And you have to just be honest. The same goes for the case when he displays garments in dark places so as to conceal their defective features. Likewise, when he displays the better of a pair of leather socks or shoes or similar items. So these are just examples, but then we can apply it to everything else. The prohibition of defrauding, and he mentions that here of a hadith, where the Prophet ﷺ passed by a man who was selling some food. And then the Prophet dipped his hand and saw some dampness, where he asked, what is this? He said, "Asabatu sama," rain fell on it. And he says, then you have put it on the top of the food so that people could see it. Right? Don't leave it at the bottom. If it really was rained on, let people know. No. And then Ustad Yusuf already mentioned the story of Jarir, where, again, here what he does is he ties it to, we have pledged ourselves to the Messenger of Allah to act in good faith with every Muslim. An-nusah li kulli Muslim. And Jarir would go out of his way to explain to people the nature of the merchandise that they were purchasing. And then people would say is that, like, if you do this, no one's going to buy from you. And then he says that we pledged allegiance to the Prophet ﷺ, is that we were going to give sincere advice to every Muslim. Khalas. And then there's an amazing story where that Wathil ibn Asqa was standing when a man sold a camel of his to someone else for 300 dirhams. And then Wathil thought nothing of it. And then after the man left with the camel, then something occurred to him. And he rushed after him. So this is the man, had his agent selling a camel. And after the man bought it, he ran after him. And he said, did you buy it for meat or to ride on? And then the man said, for riding. Then he said, I have noticed a perforation in its hoof, something slightly wrong with its hoof, and it will surely not be able to continue on its way. The man turned back to return the camel to the seller, whereupon the seller discounted 100 dirhams from its original sale price. So the man already bought the camel. But then this was a part of his nasiha to his brother. Wait, he thought at first that maybe it would be for meat. If it was to ride on, no, that's not the right price for it. These are people that they approach this whole matter very differently. And this is, again, right at the heart of what it means to approach your career from the standpoint of en tariq al-akhirah. Someone who runs their own business, someone who is managing other people, you will consider what other people don't consider. Yes, sometimes if people aren't doing their job, that you have to put your foot down. But you will consider what they're going through in their life. You will be more compassionate. You will be more forbearing. And it doesn't mean that you let yourself get taken advantage of, no. But you will do things that other people don't do because that's how we're supposed to be. Because for us, a worldly end, profit is a means. Good character is a worldly end. It's higher. And then you have your ultimate ends, which relate to the hereafter. So he says here, therefore they had understood from giving good counsel that one does not desire for his brother except what he desires for himself. They did not consider giving good counsel to be something merely complementing the moral excellences and augmentating the spiritual stations, but rather they believed it to be the very foundational requirements of Islam that they were included in their Pledge of Allegiance. This matter is difficult for most people, and because of that they opted for seclusion to devote themselves to worship. But then he says something, this is really, really important. How many more minutes do we have for the Q&A? What time does our session end? Okay, I'll try to get through this as quick as possible. So the servant will not find it easy to do that unless he firmly believes in two things. So he's really opening up the door for us how to remain principled in the process of earning a living, however it is that we earn a living. And the first is how we view our sustenance. One of them is that his concealing of the defects and his promotion of his merchandise thereby, or anything else we do to cheat, will not increase his sustenance, but rather efface it and remove its blessings. And whatever he has amassed by means of various obfuscations will be obliterated by Allah in a single instant. There'll be no barakah in it. So that if you lie on your CV somehow, you didn't really do what it is that you said you do, and you get hired accordingly, that money you accept is haram. If you lie to the government, it's one thing of just being very careful in how you get out of paying taxes. That's very different, right? I'm not saying that we lie, but you don't unnecessarily give the government money for taxes, right? What's that? Yeah, exactly. Accountants help you find tax breaks. You find legal ways to not pay taxes. There's nothing wrong with that. Even the most wealthy, but that's very different than applying for financial aid. That receiving any financial aid from anyone based upon false information is a serious problem. Getting hired for a job based upon false information is a serious problem. And these are things that we all have to know. There will be no but. So in order to be principled in earning a living, we have to understand that our sustenance is from Allah. And the worst thing that we could do is to be unprincipled. That means is that no matter what it is we receive, there'll be no blessing in it. And we'll receive the negative consequences of that. We will experience them in this world before the hereafter. And then the second thing is that he must believe in order to realize fully the imperative of giving good counsel so that it becomes easy for him, is that he knows that the profit of the afterlife in its opulence is better than the profit of this world, and that the benefits of worldly wealth shall terminate with the termination of one's lifespan while its wrongs and crimes remain. So the first one relates to that the importance of a methodology and remaining principled. And that's how we're going to really, truly thrive here in this world. The second one is we have Iman. We're people of belief. Right? This is what was referred to as the soteriological. These are all very large words. The eschatological, the teleological, all these big words simply are there to point to the hereafter, the end result of something, the salvation. The whole point is you and I have to think about the hereafter in every decision we make. That's simply what he's saying. And once we recognize how serious the everlasting hereafter is, no one would be as stupid as to make a conscious decision to give that up for a short-term profit. And so with those two meanings is that this will be facilitated for us. So whoever understands that these matters impact on his faith and that his faith is his capital in his commerce in the hereafter will not fritter away his capital that is allocated for a lifetime that will have no end to it for the sake of some profit that he can enjoy for only a limited number of days. And then he goes on to speaking, the same thing is if someone is that buying and selling by way of wazn, weighing something, or mikyal, which is where that there's measure and that's some type of known amount. And he mentions some very important details there. I will leave you to read the details of that. And Imam Al-Ghazali combines that too with also weighing our actions in the scales. And he goes into this whole beautiful tangent of that sticking to the Sirat al-Mustaqim, and how that we all know that we're going to come to the bridge over hell. وَإِن مِّنكُمْ إِلَّا وَارِدُهَا. There is none of you save that he will come to it. كَانَ عَلَى رَبِّكَ حَتْمًا مَقْضِيًّا. This is a definitive decree of your Lord. ثُمَّ نَنَجِّي الَّذِينَ اتَّقَوْا. Then we will save the people of taqwa. So we all know that we're going to come to the bridge over hell, and to the degree that we follow the straight path here in this world is to the degree that we will pass over that. And there's, of course, that great differences between many different types of people. And so this is why he says, we beseech Allah Most High to bring us in closer proximity to uprightness and justice, for indeed to stand firmly on the surface of the straight path without inclining away from it at all is something not to be yearned for. You can't really do that. You're going astray to some degree, since it is finer than the hair strand and sharper than a sword. If it were not for him, then the one who stands on it, on being upright on it, will not be capable of crossing the path that is stretched over the mouth of the fire. But if we try our best, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq. And then the last thing is to be honest about the current price. And so it is a call to honesty. And he mentions certain types of transactions that our Prophet prohibited, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the wisdoms behind it, these prohibitions prove that it is not permissible to delude the seller or the buyer with regards to the current price, or to conceal from a matter that if it were known to him that he would not have proceeded to contract the deal. This conduct is forbidden, which is in opposition to obligatory good counsel, and nusih al-wajib, which again is right at the heart of what he's trying to convey to us, is that really if we're going to talk about our interactions with others, it should be based upon sincere good counsel, wanting for others what it is that we want for ourselves. So with that, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we will conclude this session. May Allah ta'ala give us tawfiq and bless us to put it into practice in a way that is pleasing to Him. Ya Arhamar Rahimeen. So we have about 7 minutes. So if there's any brief questions on the men's side or the women's side. These are the online ones. So I think the first two were for Ustad Yusuf's. Actually, all three are for Ustad Yusuf's from there. So do we have any questions here? Is there a microphone we can hand our brother?
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Good. First of all, Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you so much for the talk. Inshallah, we all benefited. So we talk about the muamalat and having just actions within our transactions, right? But what do you do when the inherent nature of the transaction is unjust? For example, what's coming to mind is in New York City, for example, people may purchase real estate. And there are certain laws, for example, some people may argue that some certain zoning laws are unjust. For example, single-family homes, you may not put as multi-family homes, you may not rent them out. And someone might argue that this thing can further increase the wealth gap in America. And it can keep people with lower incomes in lower income areas. But that doesn't allow someone to, let's say, rent out a room in their house. So someone may say like the inherent transaction itself is unjust, and they should be allowed to do that.
Yeah. So there's a long list of things like this, and one I would say in situations like this is that one, you do your best, right? And that having the courage to do what is right and to that put yourself in a situation where some of your own luxury is taken away is also a noble thing, while also this is that matters of this nature and that the economic injustice that exists all throughout the world and in our society, and the racial injustice and a long other list of different type of injustices, is that we should be aware of them and to that find ways of presenting our teachings and affecting change within, in a principled fashion, within the realm of what we can do, right? So there's a difference between that, the permissibility of you entering into a contract like that, given that, and then between you consciously choosing not to do that and live in another place, even if it's not of luxurious. That it would seem to me that that latter one, given certain conditions, might be closer to ihsan. While at the same time, with this particular matter and other matters, is that working towards change in the society based upon our Islamic principles to really genuinely work towards the common good and to treat the incredible amounts of disparity in it is also something that at very least we shouldn't have our blinders on, that we should be aware of, and to that try to the extent possible to bring about change. So a lot of these things oftentimes take time, and but everybody tends to feel more passionate about certain things, and the more that we have principled people that are on different fronts, is that the more good that we can bring to society. No, Allah knows best. Any questions on the sister side?
We have one question in the back. If we could pass a mic back, please.
Assalamu alaikum.
Salam.
I wanted to ask you to expand a little bit. You mentioned making things up on your CV would be part of that dishonorable transaction. I wonder if you could speak to when you're making your CV or applying to a job or interviewing, when people kind of expect you to sell yourself or to talk about your qualities and convince them that you're a good fit. How would you go about that, doing that honorably?
Yeah, the number one thing there would be just to not lie, right? That if you haven't received certain training but you said that you did, or that didn't do it for the duration that you actually stated, where there was a clear lie, that is what we really want to be careful of. And one of the things that I would say is that have someone else help you write it, right? Because it's very hard for people to, it should be hard for us to write our CV in the way that we know that other people expect them to be. You might want to have someone help you write it, and then you edit it and tend to make sure, that there's not anything there that's an exaggeration or something that's a blatant lie. But saying, the skills that you know that you have, that we have the precedence for that in the Quran. That was Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam, is that he said that inni hafidhun alim, is that I am that trustworthy and I have knowledge of how to do what it is that we need to do. So stating traits that you know that it is that you have that you can bring to the table there's nothing wrong with that, but lying is the problem, right? And honestly, that if you go into a job interview and you go in with iman, like these people do not provide my rizq, right? Allah is the provider of my rizq. And I get the job. If not, I'll find another job, right? And then I believe in being genuine. And subhanAllah, I had a friend who was being interviewed for a position in law. And one of the questions, which was a really interesting question that they asked him is that, do you think you know yourself? And almost definitely that everybody was asked, yeah, I know myself very well. I know my strengths. I know my weaknesses. And he had studied tasawwuf a little bit. So he's like, actually, I don't think I know myself enough. And I think I'm actually quite ignorant of myself. And that really intrigued him because everybody else responded different. It's like, what about, do you think as you progress, you'll know yourself more? And he said, well, there might, as I come to know myself and come to know things that I didn't know about myself, maybe there's a lot of things that I'll discover that are out there that I actually don't really even know. And he got the job right away. And it wasn't just because of his answer to that one particular question, but honestly, I believe in honesty. I believe in just honesty, saying it as it is, be genuine. You don't want to get yourself in a work or a marriage relationship or a friendship where people are interacting with you based upon something that's false in relation to you. It's better to put it all out there on the table, and then if they want you, they want you. If not, find someone who wants you. And it's their loss if they don't get you. That's how I'd approach it. Wallahu alam. No, I think we have time for one more. We're out of time. Can we save the next ones for the interactive session, inshallah?
Barakallah fikum. So at this time, inshallah, we'll transition to preparations for Salat al-Asr. So Iqama will be at 6 p.m., inshallah. So if we could take the next few minutes to renew our wudu, get ready for prayer, clear the space of any of our belongings. We'll pray Salat al-Asr and conclude at 6:15, at which point the brothers will stay here in the musalla and we'll have the interactive session with our teachers. The sisters will head to the Green Barn after picking up any children or youth in the relevant programs and have dinner. At 7:15, which is an hour later, we'll switch. And so the brothers will then go to dinner and the sisters will come for the interactive session, after which we'll have the Wurd al-Latif and Salat al-Maghrib and the Mawlid for the evening. But importantly, there's Salat al-Asr now. And then the brothers will stay here for the interactive session, and the sisters will go have dinner, and then we'll switch after an hour. So with that, please do feel free to take the next few minutes to prepare for Salat al-Asr, and we'll see you then.